Well, hi everybody, and welcome to Painting Atmospheric Perspective. In a lot of my classes, we've been talking about this idea of horizon lines, which are the lines that separate the ground and the sky, and how we might be able to show foreground, middle ground, and background within a work of art. We've looked at lots of different examples and observed, compared, contrast different sorts of landscapes in class. Now, here's what we started to realize. The horizon line here is typically the area where it's the lightest. It's dark in the foreground, gets lighter towards the middle ground, or towards the horizon line. The sky, it's the opposite. It's darker at the top and it gets lighter towards that horizon line. So today, what I'm going to show you right here, I'm just going to show you a little bit about our process of how we go about that. So usually students use some sort of a mixed media paper. What I'm going to do for you right here, though, I'm going to cut this one down. This is usually the size. Now, we've done a lot of sketches up to this point, showing a variety of different landscapes. Things like within, and usually I have students do, a few different sketches, both vertical and horizontal, to show me the difference between 1, 2, and 3 different sorts of horizon lines to show distance. Maybe different sorts of climates. Maybe it's more water, okay, or more land. We definitely talk about the element of texture within a work. But how do we show varying horizon lines, and how are we able to show distance? Now that's distance just with the tips and the tricks, right, of just showing, putting things higher on the picture plane. Whereas here, now with this atmospheric perspective example, we're actually going to do it with color. So I encourage students to get at least 1 or 2, sometimes even 3 horizon lines in there. Okay, got a few of my really favorite flat head brushes. I've got a round head brush right here next to the flat heads. I've got a fan, and I've even got personal favorite, the filbert, of aka cat's tongue. Okay, so I think with this, sometimes I like to use, like flat heads. So I'm just kind of looking over my other stash. And of course, this is a different brush. This is an angular flathead brush. Okay, students usually have, in the way that we set up a palette, usually set them out lighter colors all the way down to darker colors. So I'm going to start at the very top. And I'm using acrylic. Typically in class we use either acrylic or we use tempera. Sometimes we use watercolors as well. And I'm kind of like looking at some of these, and I'm kind of mixing and matching darker values at the bottom. Got a little bit of blue, just a little dab will do ya. And I'm going to use a little bit of my Liquitex brand. Now this one is cadmium yellow. Bob Ross likes to call this cad yellow. Just cad yellow. So we'll try to get our best work in here. So I'm also going to grab a little bit of water to help us out as we start to rinse our brushes. Okay, it's good to have supplies in the studio. Now, I'm a righty, so I'm gonna most likely do a lot of my blending on the right hand side here. So let's see this coming up. Let's start to mix some of these colors. Just double checking that they're all kind of in the picture plane here. Okay, so usually I want to take the lightest color first, and I'm going to start to mix the green. So I'm just going to take a little bit, move it off to the side. Now it's a little bit more olivey because I'm using that cad yellow. And this is water-based acrylic paint. Ooh. Now, you'll see different sorts of yellows will yield different sorts of, oh, I think I have to take off the lid off of this one. So it's really cool to see the difference, between a cadmium yellow versus more of a sunshiny yellow. Okay, which is what I'm going to get right here. So you guys can see the difference. If I start to take a little bit of this sunshiny yellow, the quality of the green, it's a little bit more yellow versus a little bit more kind of an olivey color. So honestly, color mixing, it's a pretty interesting thing. I'm going to start though. I'm going to go with my darkest color the very bottom, I'm actually going to mix in a little bit more blue. So you can see right away I'm starting to get kind of this darker green. Now you'll see right away I'm starting to get this dry brush effect, but I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add just a little bit of water, and then I'll just glide across the surface. Now, we've also talked a lot about this idea of value, the lights and the darks of a particular color. Okay. So if you go a little outside of the lines, you're going to live. That's the good news. Okay, so I'm going to grab a little bit more of this because I want a little bit more of this green. And now I'm just going to grab a little bit of that white. I'm going to mix it in a totally different area, as long as I know that it's a little bit lighter. So notice here, I'm just taking a little bit at a time. Flatheads are great because you can get into those little spots. Now, sometimes I like to paint what's called lean. You can paint either really fat or lean, and that's more of actually a oil painting term. So if you paint lean, that means you do lighter layers of paint. To paint fat means that you really like thick, chunky. So for example, if I were to add some more, I'm going to make it almost like three-dimensional. But look at this. I'm also going to start to add a little bit of texture in here. I'm going to add a little bit of white. Start to lightly and start to blend it in. I don't want just one blob of white. Now, am I worrying about that line up there? Nah, because I can even go in later and I can start to do this. I can overlap that so it starts to look like even more vegetation. Okay, but really the goal for this particular project is to show students that difference between light and dark and atmospheric perspective. Things are getting lighter towards the horizon line. All right, so I'm going to wash this out. Okay. A little bit more. Now, let's start with the sky. We know it's dark in the foreground, lighter towards the middle ground. And now, and usually, I'm going to do it. I'm going to turn it upside down. Okay, because that just helps me with the blending a little bit more. Now, you notice that I did put something underneath here, some sort of a mat. And that just helps me I don't worry about getting colors so far out of the picture plane. Sometimes kids stop right here because they don't want to get the tables dirty, but I'm like, keep going. So we usually put something underneath there. All right, I'm going to grab a little bit of white. And right away, I'm going to start to put a little bit of white there. I'm going to start to bring it up. And then you'll start to see what happens. I'm going to start to get this wet into wet effect. That's the process of blending wet paint into wet paint. I'm going to add a little bit of water. And that's going to help blend it along a little bit more. Now, if you notice that it's getting a little bit too dark, let me get off some of this blue. Again, I'm going to get a little bit more white, add it in there, and then I'm just going to start to blend it. And just start to blend it upwards. Now, my goal, again, is to get it relatively so it looks like a gradual changing of value, so like a gradation. Okay, it shouldn't be like chunk, chunk, chunk of all of the colors. So there it is, atmospheric perspective. Look, you could futz with this for a really long time, but that's the basics. Thank you so much for joining me. Please remember to subscribe.